I was a massive fan of the original Gravity Rush when it was ported onto the PlayStation 4 back in 2015. I loved the world, which somehow reminded me of the counterculture chic of Jet Set Radio and the dreamy realism of games like Valkyria Chronicles. I loved the characters which, though scantily clad and occasionally playing into anime tropes, are portrayed with conviction and a lively humanity. And of course I loved the central mechanic of flying by falling, hurtling from floating island to floating island, unlocking the secrets of the world. So when Gravity Rush 2 came along, I got it as soon as I could afford to, and I was excited for more of the same. And I wasn't disappointed. A new world, similar mechanics, and the same upbeat mentality. So I was genuinely surprised when this happened. Under the main thoroughfare of the game lies the Poor District. Dark, cold, dismissed, and punctuated through mournful music. All of a sudden I knew that there was more to Gravity Rush 2 than I'd considered. I'd already been introduced to the class structures of the world, first through the itinerant Banga group who are persecuted by the merchant Vogo Sun, who in turn is persecuted by the shadowy Council. Unlike in Gravity Rush 1, whose floating islands were connected by a concentric railway line, Gravity Rush 2's world is tiered, and those tiers correlate to the very real class system of our own world. So how did I miss it? It's hardly subtext. There's literally a quest where you go to hang out with the rich people and they take turns treating you like shit, including the children. Laid out like this, it makes the story sound kind of ridiculous, or at least the commentary the story is in service to. And that's what I thought at first as well. But then I realised that Gravity Rush 2 isn't trying to impress anyone with its insights. It's not trying to weave some complicated plot with a grand statement in the conclusion. Its thesis is refreshingly simple. This is bullshit. And this is bullshit. And this is definitely bullshit. Again and again, Gravity Rush 2 doesn't debate over right or wrong. It doesn't give you the choice to side with one camp or the other, to realise that
were very fine people on both sides.
Instead it says fuck unfair and unjustified distribution of wealth. Fuck the use of force to hold up the power structures. And most of all it says fuck standing by and doing nothing. At nearly every turn, Kat rallies against the status quo, and it never questions that she's doing the right thing. Later on, the game does attempt some form of subtlety. After a revolution, a people's government is formed, and the issue of fair reparations and equality going forward are raised as a complex and demanding issue. However, I believe the game is at its acerbic best when it focuses on problems where it can draw a simple line through the sand. Now, I know this isn't popular. We've been trained to believe that the world is a complicated place, and real answers are reached by nuanced compromise. But what Gravity Rush points out is that this instinct has been perverted to let prevailing ideologies continue to exist. After all, while we're all scratching our heads, the bad thing is still happening. Not only that, but emphasizing the dialogue over solutions leads to an attempt at centrism that is usually anything but. A great example of this comes from within games and a really weak attempt at the whole fair and balanced thing, and just how it blew up in the developers' faces. In Bioshock Infinite, the main characters witness a system of horrific oppression of minorities, and later in the game see the violent uprising of those formerly oppressed. The rebellion is not peaceful, and the rebels commit horrific acts. The developers use this setting and situation not to condemn violent individuals, but rather to draw parallels between the oppressor and the oppressed. As Felan Parker puts it, numerous commentators have angrily and rigorously critiqued Infinite's simplistic equivocation between the systemic violence of racism and anti-racist resistance, which seems to suggest that to take up arms against oppression is just as bad as oppression itself. This comfortable liberal centrism, presented entirely from the perspective of white characters, is, for critics, little more than a reification of the inequitable status quo, made all the worse by Infinite's framing as a prestige text, and its popular reception as a serious, sophisticated political commentary. It's not hard to see why people were angry about this, and now more than ever. There's an idea that we can be neutral on issues, subjective and rational. People claim that they're just fair arbiters, clear-sighted purveyors of the truth, but often this aloofness is a position in itself. If someone doesn't want something to change, that doesn't mean they're wrong, but the question is, why don't they want it to change? More commonly in the modern era, people in power won't say that they're anti-change, but just that things are complicated, mechanisms are slow, and we need to be careful lest we fall into anarchy. They'll nod and call social care or universal income a good idea, but idealism run wild. That's if they don't dismiss it completely as. Yet this will also be the same people who ask for civility in the debate, because it's easy to be civil when it's not your people who need change right now. The point is that every position is political, and Gravity Rush 2, by going in with 2 feet, recognizes that and meets it. The oppression is unsubtle, and so why give it a subtle response? In this way, Gravity Rush is really a punk opus. After all, that was a working class movement that prided itself in its ignorance. If the power structure looks down on you, why would you listen? Better to yelp and bark back. If you haven't been given the language to respond, then spitting will have to do. If you're not considered worthy of high art, then revel in the low kind. Punk poetry is full of these kind of insights, tactics not just for surviving oppression, but for turning it into strength. In many ways, punk as a scene died a pretty ignoble death, subsumed into popular culture and defanged like most angry genres of art before it. Though true punk may still exist in pockets now, the main thing we should keep present is that spirit of resistance. Not to fight on their terms, but rather dismiss their terms completely, because their terms are their weapons. Gravity Rush 2's story gets pretty ridiculous as it goes along, but it's not hard to see the same themes and attitude maintained throughout. Later in the game, we meet a mayor who has taken the city through charm and charity, but later we find out that he's experimented on orphans, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, and that he's basically willing to end the lives of everyone just for the sake of his daughter. Later again, we find a people who prefer to sacrifice entire communities rather than disrupt their own serene way of life, and a boy king who seems to want power at any cost. Gravity Rush 2 offers each narrative arc as a thematic escalation of the one that came before it. They may not all be linked directly, but it's clear that the exploitation of the weak and hoarding of power increased from scenario to scenario. Gravity Rush 2 and its lovable hero Kat says that if we don't face each of these issues head on, they'll only get worse. That if we don't disrupt the flow of power directly, without getting bogged down in the rhetoric that they use to ensnare us, all is lost. Gravity Rush says, this is bullshit. This is bullshit. And this is bullshit. Someone else will say that this is complicated. What about this problem and this issue, these ramifications? And sometimes they'll be right. But unless they're honestly working towards a solution, there's a good chance they want nothing to change.